We have 2 games on Saturday that we got to deep dive. We have to look at them from a fantasy football perspective to see how the points will be scored. We're looking at the Houston Texans versus the Kansas City Chiefs. We're also looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. Both interesting matchups. Both big puzzles to try and solve as we roll into Week 16. But before we dig in, you need to click that subscribe button right now because we're doing these deep dives every week. We're going to deep dive the rest of the games on Saturday. Looking at the rest of the slate, we'll deep dive the Monday night game. We're going to help you set your lineups. Click that button. Stop missing out. But we're going to start off with the Houston Texans and the Kansas City Chiefs. 42.5 over under. And the last 3 times these teams have played has not been soon enough. The last one was in 2022. These 2 teams are vastly different since then, so you can't really go off of that. Vegas has got a 42.5 over under, so they're saying it could be a low-scoring game. They're wrong sometimes, though. So how could they be wrong? If CJ Stroud can cook, if CJ Stroud can connect a few times downfield with Nico Collins, and things open up a little bit and push the pace on the Chiefs, that's where Vegas can be wrong and they can shoot the over. Can it get really low? If the Chiefs defense can cook. So they're right in the middle there. And if CJ Stroud has an off game, he's had a few games where he was very off. That being said, it could cook either way. And it could also be right down the center. I'm not being wishy-washy. I'm just trying to tell you how the fantasy points could be scored. I think this is going to be a good puzzle to solve here when we're looking at this matchup. And you're looking at these 2 quarterbacks here. A lot of people were talking about benching or dropping Patrick Mahomes throughout the season. But he's been a steady QB2 throughout the year, so he's not really losing you any weeks, honestly. He's been just there. He's not winning you many weeks, but he's just there for you. Looks like he's set to start for Saturday, more than likely. We'll get more official news status on Friday, but it looks like he's set to start. He's set to start from what I've seen. CJ Stroud has got a tough matchup. A tough road. A lot of people are going to auto-start him. He's been an auto-start in the rankings for all the fantasy sites every week, but he's been a steady QB2. He's had a worse season than Patrick Mahomes, and a lot more people has been down on Patrick Mahomes. CJ Stroud's got a rough matchup here. He's got to be on all cylinders. He's got to tap into Nico Collins downfield a few times, and they got to get creative with how they're going to move the rock around, because usually when teams can move the rock on the Chiefs, they're being creative with it, and it's going to different pass catchers. Both quarterbacks going into this matchup are a little bit risky. A little bit riskier than what they are usually going into their matchups. And both these matchups are really tough on the quarterback, especially when you're looking at Patrick Mahomes coming from the injury. We saw him practice. We looked at the clips. We'll probably look at some more clips here today, later. But when we're looking at CJ Stroud, he's really got to be on all cylinders. When we're looking at the Chiefs running backs, Isiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, these last few weeks have not been great. And we're going up against the Houston Texans here, who has been stuffing running backs here lately. Devin Achane scored 14.6 PPR fantasy points, which if you got that from Isiah Pacheco, I think you'd be very happy. Travis Etienne got shut down. Tony Pollard went off. Rico Dowdle got shut down. They shut down Antonio Gibson, which no surprise. They shut down Tank Bigsby, no surprise. Shut down the Bears, no surprise. Jonathan Taylor only got a 10th spot. Aaron Jones blew up against him. Josh Jacobs blew up against him. Tony Pollard blew up against him. So there's some upside here to where running backs can go off, but they'll bend in most cases a little bit. So it really depends on where the touches are distributed as. Isiah Pacheco might get a little bit more work in this game due to the ankle of Patrick Mahomes. They may want to ride him out a little bit. That could allow him to get a little bit more fantasy production. I think when you're looking at this matchup, you're looking at probably the 10 to 12 range when it comes to PPR fantasy scoring. You're probably looking at somewhere around that. And how we can break past that is touchdowns. And how that could go off is just the rushing attack just not getting it done. Looking like the last 3 weeks. But there's a chance with the volume that it could be happening this week. At least getting you at like a 10 to 12 spot. Nothing major. But it looks like comparable to all the other matchups with all the other teams here. And what we've seen recently with these running backs. It looks like we're close to that range. Now you're looking at the Chiefs wide receivers. And I pointed this out in the deep dive for Hollywood Brown. That it's sad that the top wide receiver, Xavier here in yards is at 494. That is very low for any NFL team. He's got a 16% target share on the season. Rashee Rice, if he would have been healthy for the whole season, he would have eclipsed 1,000 yards easy. We got Hollywood Brown back in the fold. It looks like we'll get more official news later, but the news is pointing to that. It looks like it could be wrong. The news was pointing to that for Isiah Pacheco, and they pulled him and let him sit for another week. But Hollywood Brown looks like he's good to go, and they may want that weapon back in there due to Patrick Mahomes' injury anyways. And if he's in there, that might muddle the waters here for these wide receivers. DeAndre Hopkins might be a little bit safer bet over Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy is one of those players that if you bench him, he'll make you cry. If you start him, he makes you cry. He's just very up and down. I mean, you have 494 yards and 4 touchdowns on the Chiefs. That's a good indicator for that. You're looking at what the Texans are doing against wide receivers. They're about league average on the season. They're a little bit above by 7.4%. They're not breaking too much. Parker Washington broke them. Garrett Wilson broke them. Josh Downs broke them. Brian Thomas Jr. broke them. Justin Jefferson broke them. And then Alec Pierce broke them. So there's a chance one of these wide receivers break open in this game. There's a chance. They'll likely bend. They have not shut down a main wide receiver in scoring to under 10 PPR fantasy points. So there's a chance that one of these wide receivers break open and maybe the other wide receiver does a little something. If I would guess, it's going to be mainly DeAndre Hopkins and Xavier Worthy out there, and they'll trickle in Hollywood Brown, and he'll get a little bit of workload. A lot of people are looking at starting at Hollywood Brown because they're hurting at wide receiver, and that's a huge gamble. That's a very huge gamble. It may pay off. But we don't know. We do not know if he's going to be on a touch count or not. He may not. He may just be out there. It's a shoulder injury. If he feels good and to go, ready to rock and roll, and he's a veteran, they may just throw him out there. He knows the system. It's not like he just got traded to the team. They might throw him out there and he might get a decent route participation rate, maybe like 60%, 70% or something like that. When DeAndre Hopkins, if I remember right, he was rocking like 40-45% when he first got to the Kansas City Chiefs, but he was learning the system and all that stuff, where everything's installed with Hollywood Brown. It's really with how they want to roll with this. They do like to roll with the hot hand with the running backs, is what they said in the media throughout the whole season when they had those running back issues. We might see that with the wide receivers too. If Hollywood Brown's looking hot, they may keep him out there for longer than expected. If he's a little bit rusty, they may just trickle him in and out. That's what I feel like the Chiefs are going to do. That's what I feel like they're going to do. They're just going to play it by ear in the game. That's what they're going to do. That's what they say in press conferences throughout the season. That's probably what they're going to do. You're looking at Travis Kelce, and you really have to look at us in a straight face and tell us you're going to bench him over somebody else, because I don't see anybody really doing that. But 709 yards on the season, 2 touchdowns, 8 out at 6.9. About average for a tight end, a little bit higher than average, I would guess, but still solid there, and the volume's right. 115 targets on the season. It's hard to bench him, and the Houston Texans are allowing fantasy points to tight ends, especially like these last 5 weeks or so. Week 10, they got smashed by Sam Laporta. Luke Schoonmaker did okay. Chigakonkwo did all right. Evan Ingram did all right. Johnny Smith did all right. Travis Kelce should do all right against the Houston Texans unless something breaks, something doesn't go his way, something unforeseen, or the game script breaks. They're allowing 17.6 PPR fantasy points per game to tight ends over the last 3 weeks. 10.5 on the season, a little bit below average. But still, I think most of you are starting Travis Kelce. Looking at Joe Mixon here. Last week was very unsettling for you, and now you got the Kansas City Chiefs. He's going to be a hard guy to feel confident with. I want to hear in the comments, if you're benching him, who are you starting over him? I want to hear that. That's going to help a lot of people out because you're putting your money on the line. It's not a guy just trying to help you with your lineups. You're putting your money on the line, and that gives people a bona fide idea of what to do because that's an actual choice that's been made. But you're looking at Joe Mixon here in this matchup, and you're looking at what the Chiefs are doing, the running backs. Jerome Ford did all right against them last week, but prior to that, they did not allow over 10 PPR fantasy points to a running back in the 2 previous games. And then 13, 19, Chuba Hubbard and James Cook. That was okay. 5.3 Dodrick estimate. They will shut down running backs. They will make the backfield go quiet in some of these games. They'll bend a little bit, but not much. They have not broken to a running back all season. They have not allowed 20 PPR fantasy points to a running back all season long. I think it's safe to say if you get a full workload out of him that you're not getting 20 PPR fantasy points. I think if you simulated this game 100 times, you may get that 5 to 10 or something like that. But odds are saying that you probably might rack around the 10-point range with Joe Mixon. You'll probably get that. One thing about Joe Mixon and the Texans, they got to be creative with the ball. I expect them to get extra targets in this matchup. And also, Wale, watch him too. Watch him get a few extra targets as well. Last week, Joe Mixon got banged up, so he might get some extra workload. Watch that too. Have that on your radar. You're looking at the wide receivers here for the Texans. You're not going to 100% trust it, but they will bend more to the wide receivers. They're more of a pass funnel defense, but they won't break too often. They only broke a few times on the season. It's been recently. Jerry Jeudy last week and more from the Carolina Panthers. That being said, you got to be creative against these guys, and you're also seeing a lot of ancillary pass catchers being the main points getter for their teams, like Sterling Shepard, Jacob Cowing, Curtis Samuel. You got to be creative against these guys. Don't be surprised if like a Bobby Trees or somebody comes out of nowhere, starts scoring some fantasy points. They do have to connect with Nico Collins downfield a few times in this game for them to move the football, for this game to be worthy of watching. Worthy of watching. I was going to say competitive, but it could still be competitive. Worthy of watching. If CJ Stroud can make 2 connections downfield to Nico Collins, this game will be worthy of watching. It will push the pace and will get fantasy production from both sides of the ball. It's possible because it is Nico Collins and it is CJ Stroud. It's likely Tank Dell will have to get some work over the middle. I wouldn't be surprised he gets peppered with extra targets. I'm not putting money on it. I'm not guaranteeing on it. Overview of all this, but I would not be surprised if he gets extra targets in this matchup. Dalton Schultz, not reliable week to week, 2 tight end 1 weeks, only 1 game of over 10 PPR fantasy points. The ball is heavily concentrated Joe Mixon and Nico Collins, and then if it's not going to them, it's going to Tank Dell. Dalton Schultz might get a few extra targets in this game due to this team being creative. That's if they are creative. Maybe even Cade Stover. I would not be surprised because that's what teams have to do against the Chiefs, and they're allowing a little bit more fantasy points per game to tight ends because teams have to be creative to the tight end spot. You saw Isiah Likely, the first game of the season, go off against them because the Ravens had to be creative. Then everybody fought for him off the waiver wire. However, they're not breaking too much to the tight ends either. They may bend a little bit to Dalton Schultz. If we can start connecting downfield to Nico Collins and moving the ball at a decent clip against this tough defense. Now we're looking at the Steelers and Ravens here for this matchup. This is going to be a very interesting matchup. 45 over 100. You guys already played earlier this season back in November. It was 18-16. Slower paced game. And we do not usually hit the over. Last 3 times we've hit the under. And we're set at 45. The Ravens can push the pace downfield. This one could break open. But George Pickens is out of this game. So this is going to impact the Steelers. But we're looking at both these quarterbacks. No one's benching Lamar Jackson. Nobody's benching Lamar Jackson. He did have his only downish because it wasn't a bad game against the Steelers for fantasy scoring. He had 17 points. 17 points is all right. He's all right. I mean, you look at that chart below me, you see nothing but green, that one gray. You're looking at Russell Wilson, he's up and down. So if you're hurting at quarterback, this is an all right matchup, but he did have his only red candlestick against the Baltimore Ravens, so buyer beware on that. But if you're looking for a waiver wire quarterback, he is getting enough passing attempts to push it downfield to get it done for you. And now you're looking at Derrick Henry, and he's been kind of softer in fantasy scoring as of late. All he needs is one running lane to bust it loose. And we're against the Pittsburgh defense, who's about league average when it comes to allowing fantasy points to running backs. They've been pretty sharp the last 2 weeks. Prior to that, they almost broke the Chase Brown, the Nick Chubb. They almost broke the Austin Eckler. They broke the Tyron Tracy. They broke the Breece Hall. And that's it. They have not broken the many running backs. They've claimed close to hitting that 20-plus point threshold. But they're around league average when it comes to allowing fantasy points to running backs. If you need a modest projection to help you out, I say around 12 to 15 range. So probably around that gray candlestick or a bottom end of those green candlesticks. I could definitely see that happening in this matchup. About to where he was in week 11. Maybe a little bit more if he catches a big run. We need to cross the goal line in this matchup, Derrick Henry, to help us out in fantasy football. Rashod Bateman's questionable. Deontay Johnson's out. If Rashod Bateman's questionable, you may want to look at some of the other pass catchers if you're really, really in a bind. Zay Flowers might get some extra targets. Zay Flowers has been a wide receiver 3 this back end of the season, but he's at least hitting double digits most of those games, so it's kind of fine. But you got to watch that out. Last time against Pittsburgh, he scored 11.9 PPR fantasy points. And if Rashod Bateman's in, you're not going to fully trust him. But when he's healthy, you're not going to fully trust him anyways. He's a deep ball dandy. Rashod Bateman has an 8 out of 14.1 on the season. So when you have a deep 8 out like that, above like 12 or even 10 or 11, the odds of bringing in all those deep shots are hard. The quarterback's going to overshoot you, undershoot you. You're going to be more contested downfield because you got safeties over top. Those are just rougher targets to bring in. However, when you do bring in one of those targets, you cash. You cash hard. And if you bring in 2 of those in a game, you're splashing hard. He's had 7 touchdowns on the season. That's a big reason why. And that's why he's up and down on the season. That's why a lot of people hate him in fantasy football. But he has just as many wide receiver 1 weeks as Zay Flowers. And you're looking at the points allowed the wide receivers from the Steelers. Last 3 weeks, they've been hot allowing fantasy points. But it's been Devonta Smith, Jamar Chase, Jerry Jeudy. So some good wide receivers here. Jerry Jeudy went off on them twice. They will break at times. They will break at times, and they're bending every game except for week 1. So they might bend in this matchup to one of these wide receivers. They might bend to Zay Flowers, who's more than likely going to get the consistent touches. You're looking at the tight ends. You're going to have to pick your poison. A lot of people were down on Mark Andrews earlier in the season, but he's been kind of steady here in the back 9, the back half of the season. And you're looking at the Steelers defense here where a lot of people like to pedal it to the tight end against them because, again, they're locked down against the run a little bit. They're locked down against the pass a little bit, but they will break. However, some teams will try to get a creative against a defense like this. Tight ends that hit against them, Njoku, Gesicki, Bowers, Ferguson, Conklin. So tight ends who are getting volume. You're starting one of these tight ends, but when you do that, it's at a gamble. All tight ends are at a gamble. What I like about Mark Andrews is we got a 9.88 average depth of target, so he's getting deeper targets downfield. That allows him to hit higher. That allows him to be more of a home run threat. All tight ends are gambles unless they're like top tier, like a Brock Bowers. So that's something to pay attention to. We're going over to the Steelers side here. And when you're looking at the Steelers, you got home running back production. You got 891 yards on the season by Najee Harris, but 3.9 yards per carry. 4.1 by Jaylen Warren. His touches aren't always there, but he is getting work in the passing game. 3 RB1 weeks between the 2 running backs. And we're going up against the Baltimore defense, who are a little bit better than league average when it comes to allowing fantasy points to running backs, and they will shut down running backs. That's the scary part about them. They've broken to 2 running backs, Rashod Wright and Chase Brown, and they've shut down a bunch of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 running backs they just shut down. Full backfields, shut down, not scoring 10 PPR fantasy points. They'll bend a little bit in some other games. They've broken a couple times. That's a scary defense to go up against. Last time against Steelers, Najee Harris scored 13.3. They're probably going to ride this backfield out with George Pickens out. They're probably going to have to do that. So that's going to be scary. So they're going to have to up the rushing production. So he might volume or touch merchant himself into a bottom threshold of double-digit fantasy scoring. Touchdowns are going to matter here for the running backs. A gamble play for the wide receivers. They will absolutely break the wide receivers, and they will bend the wide receivers. Jamar Chase scored 55 points against them and 41 points against them. That being said, you got Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, Mike Williams. Not a nasty crew, but if I'm in a deep league, I may have to bend to this and pick up one of these guys and pray to the gods. They're cheap in DFS, so you might get some cheap DFS stacks, and hopefully this game breaks and it's not a snooze fest for you, and maybe you can cash hard in a tournament this week. You're looking at Pat Freiermuth here, and I got Jaylen Warren's chart up there for some reason, but Pat Freiermuth has a lot of upside in this matchup due to George Pickens being out. Should be getting targets, and against the Ravens, teams are doing okay at the tight end spot. But they're your usual guys, it looks like. Brock Bowers, Ferguson, Ertz, Otten, Njoku, Hudson, and we got Goddard again. So it's your usual suspects going off against the Ravens, those good tight ends who are getting volume, but Freiermuth should be getting some extra volume in this matchup. That should allow him to get more opportunities to do something in fantasy football. However, he's got one tight end 1 week on the season. He's got a few double-digit games, though. He's got 3 of them. So he might be all right, but buyer beware on that. You may want to just go with your standard tight end that you've been rolling with all season long. That's the matchups going into Saturday. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on the way out. Thank you for watching. Catch you on the next video.